This is the GMBN Tech Essentials series, our easy to follow series on maintaining and looking after your bike. Now, although the transmission and drivetrain of your bike does look quite complicated, it's actually pretty simple when you take a good look at it. Now, in last week's video, we took a look at the derailleurs on a bike and the shifter, trying to take the complication out of it and just show you how they worked. This time around, we're looking at everything you need to know about cables, how to replace them, how to get them to the correct length, and how to adjust them once they're in place. Now, firstly, let's just take a look at the cable system on a bike. This particular one just has a single derailleur at the rear, so there's a single set of cables running from the shifter on the handlebars to the derailleur at the back of the bike. Now, on some bikes, you get single length outer housing and inner cables. Like this one, it goes all the way direct to the shifter. On some bikes, you'll have internally routed cabling. This is obviously external, you can see it all the way. And on other bikes, you'll have a series of different cable stops on the outside, and you'll have shorter sections of outer cable, and you'll be able to see the exposed inner cable in between those stops. So the cabling system on a bike relies on the minimal friction, and the reason for that is obviously you're pulling that cable using a shifter which toggles the cable all the way through that housing to actuate the derailleur. And the derailleur, as we explained in the previous video, is quite a precise part of the bike. It has to move very precisely to get engagement for all of those gears, especially when you're returning back down into the gears where there's least tension. If your cable can't move freely inside the outer housing, then you're never going to get those gears. Now, if you're unlucky enough to ride in a wet climate, you'll have to be changing your cables more frequently than someone in a dry climate. And likewise, if you have one-piece housing all the way to the bars, then you're going to be changing the cable a little less than someone with multiple pieces of housing. The reason for that is the fact that water can get into the housing at any of those cable stops, and of course that can get surface rust in there, it can get any lubricant that's in there out, and generally add more friction. So these are the things that you're going to need for the job. Now, firstly, you're going to need an inner gear cable. There are no fuss items, you can get them from any bike shop. You can get them singles, double packs, even big reels like you see in the bike shops. It's a good idea to have a few of these in your supply at home, they'll always come in handy. Next up is some outer cable. Now, the amount you need will vary depending on how big your bike is and the routing you've already got on there. If you're unsure about this, the best thing is to actually take your old routing off, measure how long it is, and then you'll know the length you need. Now, you can buy kits with the inner and outer and all the ferrules and bits you need in a single kit, or more often than not, if you're buying this stuff from a bike shop, they'll have it on a big reel which they'll dispense the amount that you need. That's a really good way of doing it because it's not wasteful, you use the exact amount. In addition to that, you're going to need some kind of spray lube because it's always a good idea to flush out that housing first. You're going to also need some kind of very light grease, if possible a spray grease, because you're going to be able to get this into the shifter nice and easily. And you're also going to need some shop towel just to make sure everything's nice and clean afterwards. Possibly some cable ties, if like me you have cable ties to hold your outer housing to the frame. If you have reusable ones or you have reusable clips on your bike, you obviously won't need to have cable ties for that. Also, you're going to need the relevant Allen key or Torx key to undo the cable clamp on the derailleur itself. And then most importantly, you're going to need some quality cable cutters. Now, if you're any sort of home mechanic, you probably will have a set of these already. And if you haven't, I can't recommend buying a set enough. Get a good set because they will last you a very long time. I have a set of these at home that are probably about 15 years old. They keep on going if you treat them well and you just use them for cutting cables, which, as you'll find out over the time of doing this on your bike, you're going to be doing this quite a lot. You will also need a selection of cable ferrules. These that go on the outers at the end basically, and they stop the inner parts of the cable migrating out of the cable, and they also act as a dirt and a moisture guard to stop the stuff going into the cable. And then you're also going to need some cable end caps. These are soft alloy caps that crimp over the edge of the cable there just to stop it fraying and becoming messy with time. Now, I can't emphasize the importance of cable ferrules enough. Now, the whole cabling system on a bike relies on these to remain as accurate as possible for a long time. Now, the construction of outer cables is you have this outer black sheath. On the inside of that, you've got the metal strands, and then there's an inner sheath, in which case the inner cable passes within that. Now, when you trim these down using a set of cable cutters, you're obviously exposing that at the end. Over time, if you didn't use the ferrules, part of those inner cables can actually start migrating out the end of this, And a direct result of that is you're never going to have or be able to get correct cable tension on your system. When you have the ferrules in place, everything is compressed together. They're compressed into the cable stops, and you're going to get very smooth and accurate shifting. So it's really important to make sure you have all the correct components to your cables before you get started. So first things first, you want to make sure there's as little tension on the rear derailleur as possible. That means shifting it into that smallest sprocket. So that is normally your finger control or your thumb pushing away from you. So make sure it's in that, and then you want to start loosening off the cable clamp. So this is sometimes a Torx key or an Allen key, and in this case it's a 4mm Allen key bolt. You want to loosen this off, and then you're going to need to remove the cable end cap on there. Sometimes you can get away with taking these off and reusing them, which of course is a good idea. Other times, if they've been crimped a few times like this one has, it's going to be a no, so that's have to be recycled, unfortunately. When you take the cable end cap off, you're going to see if the cable's going to fray or not. If it's a nice clean bit of cable, this is going to be okay to pull backwards through the system. If it's frayed though, it can be quite tricky to do that. So at this stage, you want to trim the cable down using the cable cutters, just to make sure it's going to pull backwards through the system. And at that point, then you're going to be able to free the cable from the derailleur and pull it away. With the inner cable loosened off from the rear derailleur end, now is the time to pull it back through the whole system. In order to do that, go up to the front of the bike. You might want to just loosen off your shifter a bit just to make this a bit easier, like I have here, in which case you might need to loosen the Allen key bolt that secures it. Sometimes it's a 4 and sometimes it's a 5mm. Gently, whilst holding the shifter itself, pull the outer housing away from it, exposing the inner cable. You can then pull the inner cable back through from that point. Now at this stage, you need to identify which style of shifter you have. More modern shifters tend to have a little rubber cap, sometimes a little crosshead screwdriver head that you undo, and the cable then you can literally pull the nipple straight out from that point. Some other ones you need to actually remove the shifter from the bars and remove the whole top cap in order to access the cable nipple and pull it out from the shifter. Now, even though this cable is effectively done, it's been used on the bike, the condition of it is not too bad. So I'm just going to trim off a bit of the end so I've got a nice neat cut on it. I'm going to save this because this could come in handy elsewhere or on another bike. It could be used in places like the dropper remote cable system, which is a slightly shorter route than having to get all the way to the derailleur. It could be used for a fork or a shock lockout on a friend's bike perhaps, or it could even be used as a little hack to get you home from riding on the trails. That's going to be a video you can be able to see in the link underneath this one, and you can see what I'm talking about. Now, if you're just replacing your inner cable, it's a really good idea to flush out the outer housing, make sure it's all nice and clear on the inside. A multi-purpose lubricant, WD-40, anything like that is ideal. Something nice and thin and runny. You don't want to be putting a thick congealing kind of lube in there. Now, just one thing to point out, if you're using spray lubes anywhere near your bike, make sure no part of that lube can get anywhere near your brakes, front or rear. The best way to do that would be to have a rag over the end of the cable here, and you spray it in, and ideally at the other end where the lube is going to come out as well. So now it's time to replace the outer housing. There's a few things that's worth pointing out here. Now, it could be very easy to just throw this in the bin, get your new one out, and then just chuck it on the bike. But it's really, really important to get it the correct length, and also make sure it has the path of least resistance from shifter to the derailleur. The point of outer housing is to minimize the friction on the cable on the inside, so your gears stay working perfectly and lightly for a lot longer. Now, if you've got acute angles on the outer housing, it's going to be a lot more friction on the shifting, and obviously it's going to interfere with things. So you want that any curve to be as slight as possible. Take that into account when you're routing your cable, especially if you've got a suspension bike. If you've got a suspension bike, it's a really good idea to sit on the suspension, compress it a few times, and observe how far cables move. They're going to move around as the suspension compresses. You want to see that it's got enough movement to do that, and it's not going to pull on the cable stops in any way at all, or compress it in a way that pushes it to an acute angle. It's all about giving the cable enough room to do its own thing, and then your shifting will stay working smoothly and accurately a lot longer. Something else you must factor in is enabling you've got enough cable that it won't snap or tug on anything in the event of a crash. So spin your bars around and look at the length of your other cables on there. So you want to kind of match the same sort of length as those, enabling the bars to basically do a full turn either way. Now, because my outer housing was already the correct length, I'm literally going to hold up my new housing against the old so I can get the correct length for trimming it down. Nice easy way of doing it. You get like for like, you know it's going to work as well as it was when it's first installed onto the bike. If you've already got rid of your outer housing, you're going to need to figure this out for yourself. But it's not a bad thing to do. If anything, you can go a little bit too long. You could put the outer housing into place, and before putting the inner in there, you can try it for length, and if need be, trim it down a slight bit each time. Nice easy way of doing it. Now, because this bike has a continuous length of outer cable that runs from the derailleur all the way to the shifter, I'm just going to pop a few cable ties through, join them up and leave them loose enough to just support the cable. And I can just check then that my outer housing is the correct length before I commit to it. Now, as I emphasised a minute ago, the cable routing is really, really important to get right on your bike. Now, it doesn't make a difference if you have your front brake on the right or left in the way that your cable routing is going to look as well. But just have a little think about it. For example, so my rear shifter is on the right, and I've got the luxury here of using a cable stop on either side here. So you might think, oh, it's the closest route is actually on this side. But if I was to turn the bars all the way to left in a crash, it's going to pull a lot on that, which means in order for that to work, there's going to have to be a substantial amount of cable flopping around at the front of the bike, which you don't really want. What you want to do is minimize that. So I'm going to go around from this side, which means you can go a lot closer to the bars here. And it means I only have to allow it to pass through this amount. It's going to keep it nice and neat and still pass through the cable routes there, the cable stops as I want them to. Now's the time to pass the inner cable into the shifter itself. But just before you do that, I recommend just spraying a bit of light spray grease onto the inside. You don't want to be spraying anything like a WD-40 or any sort of degreasing type spray or solvent in there, because it's going to take anything out that's already in there. But very fine light spray grease is great because it stays in place in there and it doesn't hamper the action of the shifter. And of course, the shifter is something we barely ever need to maintain on a bike, and if there's a little bit of grease in there, it can help fend the water away, then it's always a good thing. Something else just to take into account as well is the barrel adjuster on there. Now, the job of the barrel adjuster is to take up that slack that happens in the cable system over time, known as cable stretch. Now, you may get some minute amount of inner cable stretch, but it's going to be barely anything. The actual sort of movement that happens is the cable outer settling into the ferrules, which settle into the cable stops of the frame. These are all slight movements that need a tiny bit of slack taken up. That is the job of the barrel adjuster, and it helps ensure that your cabling is nice and taut and the indexing of your gears remains true. So just wind this all the way back into the shifter, and then a little tip I like to do is just rotate it back again, so counterclockwise, one full turn. That just gives you a little room for error there in case you pull your cable through too tight or your shifting doesn't go down into the smaller sprocket. It means you've got a turn to play with without having to unclamp that inner cable. If you clamp the inner cable up once, it's going to be nice and secure. The more times you have to interfere with it, the more chances of fraying that cable has. Sometimes you're going to be lucky enough to aim it in the right place and it'll go straight in. Other times I actually have to look in line with the hole and try and see the daylight from the back of the barrel adjuster there in order to get the cable in. Before you move on, you want to make sure that the cable nipple is just settled into place. So a gentle pull on the cable. If you just actuate the gear, you should feel it pull the cable away from your hand and pull it back again a couple of times, and you'll know it's seated in there correctly. Now, although the ferrule needs to go on the end of the actual cable outer, you might find it tricky to get the cable in line with the inner sheath of that cable outer. So a good thing to do is to actually thread them on separately, just to make sure that you get a nice fit and it goes in first time into the outer housing. Then just push that onto the outer, make sure it's firmly in place and it bottoms out before pushing it all the way through. At this point, it's a good idea just to secure your shifter into your preferred position, and that's going to make indexing your gears a lot easier. Now, just before you put the inner cable into the derailleur and secure it, it's a good idea just to check your limit screws and make sure that the derailleur is set up well. If you want the full description on how to do that, click the link below this video. It's going to click you straight through to last time's video where we looked at all the adjustments you need to make to do that correctly. Essentially, there's just the two limit screws. The inner one controls the outer limit, the outer one controls the inner limit. Now for this stage, it's a good idea if you have a SRAM derailleur to just apply the lock, which means manually moving the lower cage down, pushing that lock in until it secures it. It just makes it a little bit easier so you can see what you're doing here. Now something that's very essential is making sure the cable itself accurately follows the guides on the back of the derailleur itself. Now these are different on different models of derailleur, so it's really important that you just take the time to look before you put it in, because sometimes they have a little nook they have to follow around. In this case it has a little guide has to follow around, and then where the cable secures there's a little channel that the inner cable just has to sit into. Make sure there's no slack in your system before you do this. Make sure the ferrules at both ends, or if you've got multiple stops on the frame, make sure those ferrules are seated into the stops correctly. Then pull the cable taut. Don't pull it too tight, otherwise you're going to start moving the derailleur in the direction of shifting its first gear. Just pull it till it's taut, and then you want to secure it with the pinch bolt. Again, making sure it sits into the correct channel. This does vary from derailleur to derailleur, but is often easy to just understand it by taking a good look. Now some people like to go straight into trimming the inner cable down, but what I like to do is just coil it up first, and then we're going to index the gears, and then I'll do this afterwards. The reason for that is if I need to make any adjustments, I don't need to cut the cable twice. And obviously the more you cut the cable, the more chance you have of fraying it. So try and minimize that part of it. Okay, so with the cable loosely in place here, it's been pinched nicely by the pinch bolt. What I'm going to do is shift the gear once at the lever, turn the pedals around, and hopefully it's going to hop up one gear. Now you want to repeat this process on the first, up to the first 3 sprockets, and then make sure it comes back down again, 1 click per gear shift. If it doesn't jump up the first time, you'll need to do a little bit of counterclockwise adjustment on the barrel adjuster. If it goes up but doesn't come back down, you have to do the opposite. So there we go, that is a new cable installed to the bike. The cable ties are holding it on have been cut, leaving them nice and flush so they're not going to snag my leg if I accidentally brush against the bike. The gears are nice and indexed. Again, if you want to know a bit more about that and go into a bit more detail, make sure you check out our derailleurs video that we featured last time. All there is to do now is to trim the inner cable down and fit a cable end cap on there. The reason you want the end cap on there, of course, is to stop it fraying. So I'm just going to make a nice neat cut and install a cable end cap. These can be fiddly, you can fit these using pliers, or if you've got a steady hand, you can use the end of your cable cutter tool here, just by simply pushing them into place and crimping it on the end. Don't need to go crazy, just enough to hold it in place, and that's nice and neat. So there we go, that is how you replace a gear inner and outer cable on the bike. It's a fairly simple process, you just basically have to reverse what's already on there. And how often should you do this? When your gears are playing up, if your cabling feels incredibly tight, or if you ride it in wet conditions a lot, it's a good thing to do annually. But you will know when the time comes, because your gears will be playing up and you'll hopefully have got everything else adjusted, and you're going to be able to understand that it is the cable. For a couple more useful videos, if you want to see everything about adjusting your derailleurs, how to adjust them and what those adjustments do, click down here. And if you want to see the rest of our essentials videos, click up the top there. As always, click on the round globe to subscribe to GMBN Tech, and if you click the little bell feature, it means every time we upload a video or an essentials video, you'll know about it. And as always, if you like our videos, give us a thumbs up.